Hi, I'm Kristen Bakke, the host of No Filter. We are in Hibbing, Minnesota today, and we have a guest we are so excited to share with you. On today's episode of No Filter, we are welcoming an incredible woman. She's been involved in community development, economic development, nonprofit work, and she has run for public office. We are so excited to welcome Lorrie Janatopoulos. Well, Lorrie, thank you for joining us on No Filter.
Sure.
So excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. You have quite the storied life, so we're going to get into all of that. But I really want to start out with when you were growing up as a kid.
Sure.
So you grew up in Two Harbors, right?
I did. Okay. Yeah. I grew up in Two Harbors with my grandmother and my two uncles on my mother's side. So Two Harbors, it was a great place to grow up. You know, the neighborhood had a lot of kids. We were always playing, doing things. It was interesting, though, having kind of a non-traditional family, you know, with my grandmother and my two uncles. You know, I would remember like going to school, right, where my grandmother was not like mother, father, it was guardian. And I always thought that was an interesting, you know, term. So I always felt maybe a little bit different than other kids, you know, growing up. But like I said, it was a really nice community to grow up in. Always lived in northeastern Minnesota.
Was that difficult for you as a kid? Like, I sometimes I think we don't give kids as much credit that they know what's going on. I'm just curious if that was difficult for you to feel different.
You know, probably it was, you know, when I think about it, because like I said, I noticed things like my grandmother being labeled a guardian at school. And then in addition, you know, one of my uncles had some real mental health challenges. So that was also different. And so there were things that, you know, I didn't have people stay overnight, basically, you know, things like that. And so it was somewhat difficult, but I guess it made me maybe reach out more. I've always kind of been an outgoing person and, you know, and hanging out with, you know, friends, making sure that I had friends, you know, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
What was it like growing up so close to Lake Superior?
Yeah, so, you know, I was only a few blocks away, and that was great. You know, we would always go play, you know, in the parks, by the lake, that sort of thing. The lake was always really cold, so we didn't really swim much, you know, in the lake. But I didn't realize until I was older what, you know, what an amazing resource Lake Superior is, and just that kind of the beauty of it, and agate hunting and the calmness of it, you know. I think I took that for granted when I was, you know, growing up, but yeah.
Do you have an eye for agates?
Well, you know, kind of. Yeah, kind of.
I don't.
Yeah.
I do not, and it's very frustrating.
No, because we would always go, you know, agate hunting on the beaches and such, and and if you find a large one, that was fun. You know, a fisheye agate, that was fun. Yeah, so
that's cool. Yeah. So you enjoyed your childhood.
Yes.
Like, what were some of the things that you enjoyed doing in, you know, whether as a kid or through high school? What were you into?
Yeah. Well, I did pretty well in school. So I was into a lot of extracurricular things too. And so, you know, French club, you know, AFS or American Foreign Service Exchange, whatever that was, you know, that sort of thing, you know, and so that I really liked. I really liked winter a lot. You know, we would do a lot of fun activities. We had snowmobiles, you know, and going snowmobiling with friends and, you know, that sort of thing, skating and sliding down the high school hill, you know. So that was great with, you know, with the group of friends. I did, like I said, I did enjoy school quite a bit and did pretty well. I was in Girl Scouts, that sort of thing. Yeah. I'm afraid I've always kind of been a devil's advocate or contrarian a bit. Like, my Girl Scout leaders weren't necessarily real happy when I named my patrol the Rat Patrol. You know? And I think I got one badge, and that was one that we worked on together. Of all things, a hospitality badge.
Really?
Yeah. So, at any rate, yeah.
Do you have any siblings, or did you grow up an only child?
I kind of grew up an only child. I have siblings, but they lived with my mother.
Okay.
I didn't know my father or my father's side.
Okay.
And so my mother had, I had a sister and two brothers.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
I grew up with 3 siblings.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about, you said that you always made sure you had friends around you, and that was really important to you.
Yeah.
And I wonder if being the only kid in the house kind of played into that.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. I mean, my uncles weren't, real old when I was born. I think my Uncle Jack was probably 16 or so. And so he and I did a lot of things together too. We would go bike riding and whatever. He was kind of a best friend, uncle, so to speak. Mm-hmm. My Uncle Jim, we did things too. My Uncle Jim was the one that had some, mental health concerns.
Okay.
I say that with some laughter only because he was really funny too, and so.
You mentioned he was incredibly smart too,
yes.
right?
Yeah. He was brilliant. He would, and he wanted me to be really smart too. So he would buy me all these books, and we would stay up late at night to work on my homework. My grandmother would be so mad because I should be in bed, that sort of thing. But one thing that I remember most about him, or one of the stories, was we were bike riding together, and like this police car was behind us, and my Uncle Jim, he saw this police car, and he picked up his bicycle and he started running through yards. And I'm like, I have no idea what's going on, so I pick up my bicycle and I go running. The cops turn on their lights, they go around, and they're like, what are you doing? And he's like, it's not illegal to be eccentric. And so it's like, I love that, and that's one of my philosophies in life, I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's not illegal to be eccentric.
Yeah.
That is great.
Yeah, right?
And you feel like you've really kind of lived by that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for better or for worse.
Did you feel as a kid really supported in whatever it was you were passionate about exploring?
Yeah, because, honestly, my grandmother and both my uncles I was the only kid in the house, and so everything was really, mostly about me, which is, I like that, and they were very, supportive of whatever I chose to do, and, and my Uncle Jim, who was, as I said, really smart, believed I could do anything that, I wanted to do if I put my mind to it, so.
Did you realize that at the time, or was it later on that you realized, wow, I had a strong support system in my home growing up? Yeah,
I think I realized it a little bit at the time, because I did have sort of bigger dreams then, too, and I was always kind of surprised, in school and such, when sometimes girls, for instance, didn't think that they could, do as much as boys could. And it was like, where does that come from? Even though I think I ended up taking it in too, because we grew up in that kind of situation. Mm-hmm. And, it's hard to kind of break out of regardless of what what support you kind of have.
Yeah, it is. And I think a lot of people can relate to that or have a moment where it's like, ooh, can I do that as a female or as a girl?
Right.
Am I capable? Which I hate to even say that.
Right.
But I think it's a pretty common thought that we have.
Yeah.
So how did you work through those moments?
Yeah. I don't really, I think later, because there was a period of time where I think that I I didn't end up going to school right away, got college. I went for 1 year and then I dropped out and got married to this guy that had been, a high school kind of sweetheart thing, sort of. and it's like, because in some ways I think that my family had been so non-traditional and I wanted normal, and so later on, I really started realizing more about, and some of that support kind of came back, and it's like, and then getting upset and angry that girls are not given, their due, really, and the sexism that obviously exists, and feeling that, and then really trying to do things and support causes that, I believed in, to especially help women and children and those that have been marginalized. That's kind of been the story of, my career, that sort of thing.
This is such a small thing, but I always think about this. I loved baseball. I loved playing baseball. First base and catcher were kind of my positions that I enjoyed. And when I was in 7th or 8th grade, I was told you can't play anymore because now it moves from the little league version to high school. And girls can't play boys baseball. And I was shocked. I could not believe that they wouldn't allow me to play baseball.
Right.
I didn't care if it was a boys team. I just wanted to play. And I had to play softball, and I was terrible at softball. I was afraid of the ball. I didn't like fast pitch. It was, but that's one of those instances as a kid where I thought, this shouldn't be a big deal.
Right.
I can't just play baseball.
Right.
So it's a small thing. It's, a sport, but it was one of those moments. Small.
I mean, really, because when you say that, I think back to when we started basketball and such. Girls could only play half-court basketball. You could only dribble 3 times.
What?
Yeah. That was back in the day.
Wow.
And girls' sports were just really kind of getting started when I was in high school, and so I was in volleyball and basketball and that sort of thing, but the different rules. And it reminds me of even hockey today, right? That there's no check hockey and for girls or women or whatever, and why are those rules different, and that sort of thing.
Still questions to be asked. But it has been fun to see women's sports sort of take the center stage and spotlight lately. That's been really exciting to see.
Exactly.
And to see the passion around it too.
Yes.
It's about time.
Exactly. Exactly.
So you were obviously pretty involved in school. What about politics when you were in school? Was that ever? I was on student council. I was kind of into that stuff right away. Were you similar?
I wasn't in student council, but I did. I was working. When I say working, volunteering at fair booths and such for candidates.
In high school?
In high school, when I was in 11th grade. My best friend, she and her family were very politically active, and so, we did that sort of thing. We ended up in high school actually going to, we went to one of the caucuses just to see what it was like, and that sort of thing. So, and my Uncle Jim, who, in his younger years, he had been a young Republican. Over the course of my lifetime, he went from young Republican to socialist. But we would stay up again at night and watch the political conventions and such. And so there was a lot of political talk in the household. Vietnam War was going on, that sort of thing. And so,
What interested you? I picture you in high school saying, I'm going to go and volunteer at this fair booth for a candidate who I can't vote for yet, right? You wouldn't have been voting age yet. What was it that kind of sparked some curiosity for you?
I mean, just sort of the fun of it, right? And my friend and her family were very passionate about politics. and the fact that, you know, these will be leaders of public policy and such. And I think I realized that was important even when I was in 11th grade. And who doesn't like to be in a fair booth? I mean, right? And see everybody come by.
Yeah.
I love fair booths. I love parades. I love that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
There's always a lot of energy in those spaces.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So all of that.
That's great.
Yeah.
What did you, in high school, what was your plan? What were you thinking life would be like post high school?
Yeah. You know, I wish that I would have been more of a planner. You know, I knew I did well. I knew I wanted to go to college. And I actually wanted to go into anthropology. And I liked English. Yeah.
What was it about anthropology?
You know, I think I love the kind of the stories of where we came from as humans, and you know, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, I actually just remembered that I had, you know, and my Uncle Jim, who bought me all these books, you know, he bought me this series of books on early humans and, you know, that sort of thing. And so that's what I was thinking that I might like. And then I was shifting into sociology and English and, you know, that sort of thing. But again, I dropped out after a year at Augsburg and, you know, got married, you know, and so lost a lot of years with that. But anyway, yeah, so that's kind of what I was thinking. And then though, you know, I always wanted to finish school. Always wanted to get that college degree. And so I did end up finishing, graduating from College of St. Scholastica when I was 40, you know, summa cum laude, which, you know, I'm very excited.
Yes.
I was very excited about that. And I got my master's degree from the Humphrey School when I was 60 in public affairs. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. It
Yeah.
kind of came full circle with
Yeah.
the public affairs
Yes.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about that in-between period? What were you, I know you've been involved in community development,
Yeah.
economic development.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that and how you got there.
Yeah. Well, so when my son was very young, I worked at Pamida. You know, I was in the money room counting all the money. I hated Christmas. I mean, all that money coming in, all that. At any rate, and so that was basically my first job after he started, you know, kindergarten. Okay. But I was still always involved in politics and wanting to get into that. And so I worked on Liz Prebich's campaign for county commissioner. And when she won, she hired me as her assistant in her office, which was really a, you know, jumping off place for developing a lot of relationships and getting to meet a lot of people and helping her out and learning from her about, you know, public policy work and assisting with that. And so that kind of cemented kind of the passion that I had before. And I was at the same time involved in a lot of, as I said, I volunteered for community organizations and for boards, especially those that, you know, were oriented toward helping women and people that were otherwise marginalized. And so all of that kind of came together in those years. And then I was taking some classes on the side, you know, and I got when I went to Scholastica, there was a person who's actually from Virginia who was in the counseling office who really helped me, you know, through getting into Scholastica and getting prior credit or credit for prior learning and all of that. And so that was really a springboard to kind of finish up the schooling that I always wanted to do, you know, anyway. So
how did you get from, I want to make sure we connect the dots, from Two Harbors.
Yep.
And then, but now you live on the range.
Yep. Yeah.
So how did you end up being an Iron Range resident?
Yeah. So my husband at the time got a job at Evelyn Taconite. And so we moved up here for his job.
Okay.
Yeah, and that would have been in 76, 77.
Okay.
Yeah, and that would have, I graduated from high school in 75, so like a year or so later.
Okay. So
yeah.
you've been on the Iron Range a long time.
Yeah. Not still a packsacker, I guess.
Yeah. My mom, her father was in the military, and so she has 5 other siblings, and they were all born in different places. She was born in Belgium because of his military time, but they moved to the range. I think they were in Cloquet first, and then I think she got to Chisholm around age 7 or so.
Okay.
She was still young.
Yeah.
And she still says the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, you are a ranger.
I know. I think we do have to claim it more because so many people aren't, don't have, ancestors in the cemeteries.
Right.
Right. So,
yeah. What was it like for you, moving to the Iron Range?
Yeah, I was young, and it took a while to get to meet people actually. And so it was lonely to begin with. My son was young, baby in 77. And so that was, I think, that was good. It gave me something to do. Mm-hmm. My husband at the time, his aunt and uncle lived up here, so we would go and visit them. But yeah, it was lonely. I was at home. I was, I sometimes joke that I have tried on a few mental health issues over the course of the years, but it was, I wasn't necessarily happy to leave the house and to do things.
Sure.
So that took a while, but then I did I knew that I needed to join some things. And so that's when I got on some of the boards of like the sexual assault program of Northern St. Louis County, Range Women's Advocates at the time, that sort of thing.
Yeah, because now you're involved in so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's interesting to hear that it took a little bit.
Yeah.
But it also makes sense. I think a lot of people deal with that, whether you move to a new place or not.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have those, times of your life where you just don't have the energy to get out and be involved.
Yeah.
But knowing you, it's...
But honestly, I was afraid of it. It was actually, it was a different time in my life. The marriage wasn't good. And that was unfortunate. It was abusive actually. And so that was difficult. And I just felt better at home. It surprises me now who I was then, so. Yeah.
How do you think I mean, first of all, I'm really sorry that you went through all of that. How did you find the strength to get out of that?
Yeah, by building up friendships. When I started getting involved with things, there were people that I developed friendships with. The friend from Two Harbors that I mentioned, Lisa, she ended up moving up here too through a fluke of fate. We had gone to Augsburg College together, and she finished, after I left after a year. And so, so she was up here, so that was helpful, and so those kind of friends who helped me figure out that I could leave and how to go about doing it really was, the saving grace. So
that seems to be a theme for you, right? But I think that's so important for anybody, no matter what you might be dealing with, to have a support system,
right?
Outside of the home,
right?
Too,
right,
is crucial,
right?
especially in your situation.
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely was. And I mean, Range Women's Advocates was also helpful, I remember looking at the abuse wheel, that is common in domestic violence situations the first time, and realizing that was me. And it was like, wow, I don't know that knew that otherwise. So yeah.
And isn't that interesting because you were in it?
Yes. Yeah.
But to see it and realize what was happening and what you were dealing with, that must have been a impactful moment for you.
Yeah. Absolutely, for sure. So.
And then it also seems like that terrible situation really led to all of the work that you've done since then. So can you talk about a few things that you've been involved in that you're really proud of?
Sure. Yep. And so after I left working for Commissioner Prebich, I went to AUA, Arrowhead Economic Opportunity Agency, and I started there as a planner in the housing area. And I had been on the board of Range Transitional Housing prior to that too, and so I knew a little bit about housing and helped develop things like Bill's House in Virginia, which is homeless shelter, short-term transitional housing facility. Helped develop programs for first-time home buyers, that sort of thing, and so went from planner to planning director when the director at the time left, and so I was involved in all of our departments in writing grants for funding, but developing the services and programs for people that were economically or socially challenged. And a real constant for me was not about us without us. Like we always had to talk to the people, I believed, we always had to talk to the people that we were developing programs for to see what they needed. It's not up to me to determine what they need if I don't live their life. And so how do I learn that? So that's kind of a, philosophy for me. Now, I had, as I'd mentioned, I'd been involved in a lot of community organizations, and I kept that up. And then I went a little bit more regional with that too. And so I had gotten involved in the LGBTQ plus movement, and so I was the organizer for our area for It's Time Minnesota, when we added sexual orientation to the Human Rights Act for the state, and so I did some of that. I was on Governor Carlson's gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender Minnesotans committee to make recommendations for the state, at that time. So
what was that experience like?
Yeah, so it was really good. We went around the state to hear from, the queer community about what their experience was. This was in the 90s or 80s, 90s, must have been early 90s.
Okay.
And the committee came to Virginia, but we held it kind of in secret. And we held it in the Unitarian Church, so that they could hear from community members there about who's here, what's their experience living here, that sort of thing. So I think that was, great. I loved it. I loved being part of that development of where can we go, from here. In 1992, my wife, Sharon, and I were married. It wasn't legal at the time, but we were married in the Unitarian Church in Virginia. We had about 70 some people there. And so that, I think that was one of the probably most impactful moments in my life, really. And so that was some of the work I was doing. And after the community organizations and such, which I kind of did almost all of my career, I was a 2016 Bush Fellow, and so that just brought things to another level for me. That was an amazing couple of years.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I mean, you've really run the gamut.
Yeah.
It's so incredible. And what's really cool about your story is your life experience and things that you've had to deal with
Yeah.
have caused you to then say, I want to help other people
Yeah.
in similar situations or in other situations.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, that's the goal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really special.
Yeah.
You mentioned that when you were on the governor's
Task force.
Thank
Yep.
you, that you held the meeting in Virginia in secret.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we wanted to make sure that, people from the queer community would feel safe attending. And so the meeting wasn't publicly, noticed. So that sort of thing.
And
so
that was in the early 90s?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And it was, and we held it at the Unitarian Church. At any rate, we did get a good showing, from community members at the time, and so that was, I think it was impactful for the committee also to hear what it was like in this area of Greater Minnesota. Now, having said that, for the bill that passed the legislature at the time, including sexual orientation in the Human Rights Act, our entire legislative delegation voted in favor of it. And so, that I believe I had, I helped with, having had political relationships, basically from the time or before I moved here, and then from the time I moved here, as I said, I was politically involved. So I think putting a face and story on sometimes on things that people might not otherwise think about is helpful.
Can really humanize an issue.
Yes.
Instead of it just being an issue. It's like, no, this is so-and-so's issue.
Right.
And not just theirs, many people's issue. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the marriage equality.
Yeah.
Because were you involved in that as well?
I was involved to the extent that, I wrote letters to or talked with our legislators, at the time. I think that, my wife actually, Sharon, she testified in Grand Rapids. So they wanted, prior to equality, there was a move to put into the Minnesota Constitution that marriage is between one man and one woman. That failed, that amendment to the Constitution, and they were doing this. They were having this committee hearing in Grand Rapids. I think they believed that having it in Greater Minnesota might, increase their chances of passing it. But she testified, she did a great job in that, in her testimony. That was awesome. And then we got to the vote about, where there was the further vote in a few years that we won, that Minnesota did not pass that because of the difference in how we had conversations with people. And then from there, I never thought we'd see marriage equality, in my lifetime, back when I was on the governor's task force. And so I think that movement really helped. And so when we had that moment where we could vote, where they could vote on marriage equality, and it happened, I was down there for that vote. And the thing that was like most moving to me was really, all the people. And then Karen Clark, who had been an out legislator for many, many, many years in the House, a representative, who had dealt with her colleagues early on, calling names, and they had a bouquet of flowers on her desk that day when they voted in the House to move marriage equality forward, and it was just incredibly moving. So,
do you remember that day? Do you remember what were you feeling?
Yeah, it was just like, again, it was sort of unbelievable that it was actually happening. And and, you know, and then planning, we'll need a second wedding, so it's legal, and so party. That crossed my mind, actually. Yeah.
Well, and with all the work that you put into it, too, it's like...
Yeah. And just, I mean, incredibly moving, you know, and again, the you know, Karen Clark and Scott Dibble, and Alan Spear before them, alt legislators, you know, just what they had gone through and for this data then actually happen, you know, just incredible.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You know, you have played so many different roles, and you've made a lot of impact and movement on issues. Did you ever think you would run for office?
You know, when I first ran, so this last time was the third time I've run, but I never did think I would run for office because I had always been the person kind of helping other people, you know, run for office, working on campaigns, you know, helping with Tommy Rukavina's letters to the editor, you know, that sort of thing. Helping Liz, I didn't really think, and that's partly because women don't really think they can run for office. You know, they need to be asked more times, just like with anything else. Yeah. But I had belonged with to a group called the White House Project at the time. It's Vote, Run, Lead Now. And it's sort of like, why not you? You know, and I finally asked myself the question, well, why not me? You know, why not run, right? And so, it was incredibly scary to throw my, you know, hat in the ring the first time. You know, I did take some training, got some training from the Victory Fund, which is LGBTQ plus training for candidates. It was incredibly helpful when I ran for county commissioner. And so I had no idea I would run three times though.
So county commissioner, what was the second?
Yeah, the second one was I ran in the primary against Jason Metza for Tom Rukavina's seat. And so I ran then, and then the third time just now, you know, just recently. Yeah, that was the largest surprise probably of them all. You know, this last time.
What really inspired you to say, you know, it's a lot of credit should be given to any person who runs for office because you're putting your whole self out there.
Yeah.
So what inspired that?
Yeah. I thought we needed a candidate. I mean, this seat that actually had been progressive DFL seat for decades. I thought we needed somebody viable to run, you know, and as you probably remember, there weren't that many people that were stepping up at the time. People didn't realize, I don't think, that Dave was, you know, going to not be able to run this time around. And so there was very short notice, and that made it difficult. It is a job that I would love. I mean, I would consider it the culmination of, you know, everything I've done, you know, and I really would love that work. So that was part of it, right? I knew I'd be getting in late, and so that was a little scary, but I thought I was a viable candidate. I thought we needed that. I thought we needed a contest, you know, and so I knew that the predictions were, you know, probably not in my favor, given that the district had become more and more conservative over the years. But the campaign felt really, really good, you know, and so those things were why I ran. I thought we needed the contest. I thought I would love the job if I were to get it. And I know how to run. You know, I've done it before. And, you know, I've got a great team that I had. I had the best campaign team ever. And so that's kind of the inspiration.
What was your biggest fear?
I think, you know, along the way, there's different fears that come up, you know? And so like the debate was a fear, like, what if I do something dumb? Debates don't necessarily, in general, they don't make a huge amount of difference, I don't think, unless you do something, stupid. So that was a concern. I wasn't concerned about, my wife was a little more concerned that people would, I know that there's been so much political violence in the last number of years that there might be some of that maybe security cameras would be a good thing. Maybe we live in the middle of the woods. I wasn't really afraid of that, but it crossed my mind, I guess I wasn't afraid to lose. I was disappointed, in losing. But, I think the fears along the way, okay, am I going to get this interview right? Am I going to be able to answer all of these endorsement questionnaires? Am I going to, all the speeches you have to make on the spur of the moment? Those sorts of things that I would, do something dumb, I guess.
And you had how many months before election day?
So I filed on the last day you could file. Okay. So that was, I think, June 4th. So June 4th to November, 5?
Yeah, not very long.
No, yeah. And I was surprised about how much support I was getting, actually. Money came in really well. I was surprised to have people clapping in 4th of July parades. That had never happened before. I think Democrats in general were just so happy to have somebody that, would step into running, that they were, and really wanted to hold this seat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
what would you say to young women, or not even young women, just women?
Yeah.
What would you say to women in general who want to run for office or think, I want to make a difference? Maybe it's on the county board or city council, or maybe it is for a state seat.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone who is hesitant to step out into that world?
Yeah. I think, honestly, think about why they're hesitant and what their fears are. And in general, their fears are probably overblown from what actually happens. Like, there aren't going to be stories that come out about all the skeletons in closets and such. That just, it didn't happen to me. And so I don't think that happens, and we need that kind of representation. We need women to be half of our legislative bodies and our decision-making bodies. And they just traditionally have not been, at least half, I like what Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, that why don't we have all women on the Supreme Court? Because we've had all men, and so it isn't, and there is support out there. There is help, I'd be willing to help whoever wants to run. And I know a lot of women do and will, because a lot of people, and a lot of men too, because a lot of people stepped up, to help me. And so just not to be afraid of it, and we need you.
What was most surprising to you out on the campaign trail? You interact with so many people in so many different areas of the district. What was most surprising to you?
I think, the stories at the doors, not necessarily surprising, but rewarding. Learning about what people's desires, dreams, fears, complaints, are, I think, one-to-one, just having those conversations with people. That was, I think, the most rewarding. Not surprising, but rewarding.
Yeah, I think especially today, politics can be so divisive.
Yeah.
But when I talk to people in politics who are out talking to so many different folks around a particular region or community, it's like everybody really wants kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
Right? They want to be able to support their family. They want their kids to have a good education. They want to live a happy life.
Right.
Is that sort of what you were grasping from your conversations?
Yeah. Yeah. That is the theme. Even with people that, might be not voting for me, that's what they wanted, and so you could hear that in, what they had to say too. So, yeah.
What's next for you?
Yeah, well, pickleball. So, as many
Are you good
days,
at it? Are you a good pickleball player?
I'm mediocre.
Okay.
But yeah. And so I try to play as many days as I can. So, so pickleball. Also, prior to knowing I was going to run for office, I like writing a lot. One of the things I did with the Bush Foundation Fellowship was like to go to Iowa Summer Writing Festival. And it's something that I've put on the back burner. And so I got back into a writing group that I belonged to prior to running. And so I'll be doing some of that, and we'll see where that goes, kind of creative writing. And my wife and I have always traveled quite a bit. So, that will, stay on the forefront. And then just, figuring it out from there. So.
And you have a grandkid?
Yes. Yeah. 2.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
2.
Yeah. Our oldest granddaughter is 20.
Okay.
And our younger granddaughter will turn 15 in March.
Okay.
And so we're hoping to actually take her to Greece. Yeah, sometime this summer.
Oh,
so,
what an experience
yeah,
that'll be.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we have some Greek heritage, and so we asked her where she might like to go, and so she thought Greece would
Smart
be
girl.
fun. Yeah, right? Yeah.
That would have been my choice too.
Yeah. So hopefully,
That's incredible.
Yeah. So those are kind of what plans I have now. And of course, I'm going to stay involved in, politics and policy and however I can. I'm not exactly sure what that will be now, but yeah, I can't see myself not doing that anymore. I'm on, I had to resign from Women Winning Board when I decided to run, but I'm getting back on Women Winning Board if they'll have me, and I think they will, that sort of thing. And so we'll see where that goes.
What would you say to the Lorrie who had just moved to Iron Range, who was not wanting to leave the house in a really tough place? What would you say to her now after all of the life that you've lived and continue to live and all of the impact that you've had? Yeah.
I guess not to worry that things will turn out. You might have to put some effort into it, but things can turn out, and to follow those dreams that, you had, and to continue forward. And one thing that I guess that I did learn a lot from the campaign too is that, over the course of life, there are sometimes people that you have a falling out with, or, whatever, over causes and things like that. I reconciled with a number of people that I had, and reconciled might be a big word, but like, don't leave anybody out of your life for too long over something that might be really important, but there's so many more aspects to them. So like one of the stories I told on the campaign trail, which is true, my ex-husband asked me for a lawn sign, my sign in his yard. He gave a donation. He lives in Evelyn. And it's like, I spent a lot of years, not really liking him very well. And now, it's like things change, right? And, don't leave anybody out forever.
Really good advice.
Yeah.
How did you find that forgiveness?
Well, it had been a lot of years. We do have a couple of granddaughters. He's had some health issues. It's more, in some ways I feel sorry for him, and so that makes it easier.
What would you describe as a good life?
Good life?
What does it mean to you?
Yeah. I think it is really having dreams, doing some of the things that make you happy, whether that's going out to dinner with friends, having a glass of wine, playing pickleball, those things, and having kind of gratitude about your life and trying to help other people. I think that's a good life.
And what are your hopes for the future? I mean, you've seen so much progress happen, and I know we have a ways to go on a lot of different issues. Yeah. But what are you hopeful for?
Yeah. I'm hoping that we can get over the divisiveness somehow. I'm hoping that, that we stay intact as a country, actually, somehow. And I'm hoping that the Iron Range stays the unique and quirky place that it is. I love it here, and the people. And so I hope that stays as it is, and that we can, continue to thrive here. So, and some of the things too, like the younger generation moving into roles of like Ida Rukavina, commissioner of the IRRR, Julie Lucas, that younger group of women. I'm very excited about that. And, the future only looks bright because of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it looks bright because of a lot of what you have contributed to.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well,
before we wrap up, the part that I would love to hear about is how you met your wife, and how you fell in love, and how it inspired the rest of your career.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. So, I was getting out of the marriage. I was looking at a divorce, with my husband at the time. And I had some friends who were in my group who were lesbian, who I had kind of, looked up to. And when I thought back over my growing up years, I never believed I could be anything but straight. I had not ever heard the word lesbian, growing up. I didn't know there was another way, really. And as I said, I had wanted to be normal, so I kind of fell into what everybody else was doing. But this group of friends that I met on the Iron Range who, had been out for a long time, I was really drawn to. I really started wondering about, my sexuality, at the time. And so I put this into the universe. I still say that I created this, but so Legal Aid at the time was hiring another attorney. My friend Karen worked at Legal Aid, and I told her, I think you should hire a lesbian attorney, and then she can, I can get together with her. Well, they hired Sharon, and who would have known, Yeah, it's like I just ordered that from the universe, and it happened. Now, Sharon was with somebody else at the time, but over the course of a couple of years or so, we did, we traveled in the same circles then, because I was coming out, she was out, and we did end up getting together. I was really worried about coming out, though, like coming out publicly kind of a thing. But I realized that I talk a lot of, about my life and such, and that there was no way that I could not talk about my family and, and my life, and that sort of thing. And so, my son was about 12, 13 at the time. Okay. And so, he was meeting with Sharon when she was over at the house, and it just, we just sort of all kind of naturally became a family unit. And then when we married in the Unitarian Church in '92, my son was kind of, part of the wedding. And when we married in 2013, he gave a toast that people were crying when he was doing the toast about, Sharon being so important in his life and his stepmother, and such. And so it wasn't always easy, believe me. There were a lot of tough times in there, but like I said, it's been probably the most impactful thing that I've done in my life. And now this year we'll be together since 92, 33 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
So, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
What was your son's reaction? Was he just...
Well, he was worried, he was,
okay.
And he would tell friends that he would had friends stay over on occasion. And one of the stories he told them was that Sharon was my sister, who a hurricane had blown in her law practice in Florida. That was one. Another one was that she was a live-in maid and she got up early. We had to stop that story. Like, she did not like that story. And so, yeah.
Kids are creative, right? Imagination.
Yeah, exactly. And then I do remember, we went to Puerto Rico once, the three of us, and he was so upset because we got a car without air conditioning because Sharon is cheap, let's just say that. And so it was not air conditioning, and he was, and then he saw, like, in Puerto Rico, he saw, like, the bars on some of the windows, and he's like, you brought me to this place with crime and blah, blah. But by the end of the trip, because we went all the way around the island, he had a Spanish-English dictionary with, and loved the people. It was really great to get kind of off the range to a whole different area. And so that was a real bonding kind of experience too. So, yeah.
Oh, that's so special.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of that with us. It's been so nice chatting with you and getting to know so much about your story.
Yeah, for sure.
And again, just thank you for being so open with us.
Yeah, well, look, it's kind of my MO. So, anyway, well,
thank you, Lorrie.
Yeah.
Yes.
Appreciate it.